I texted them from the airport, arriving at 11:40, Gate 6. Mom misses you. 14 months in a military hospital, 11 surgeries. I made it back, but no one showed up. Not my son, not even the daughter-in-law I helped raise their kids. I sat alone in my uniform watching families reunite all around me. Maybe they thought I'd die and stay out of their way forever. But I came home, and what I did next, I never told anyone until now. I had pictured it differently. After all the pain, the silence, the sterile walls, and the hollow sound of my own breath in that military hospital, I thought someone would be there. Not with balloons or fanfare, just a face I knew, a voice that felt like home, anything human. But all I got was cold air and the wheeze of automatic doors. I had asked for one thing, just one. I texted it like a mother who still had a place in their lives. Not begging, not dramatic, just a message. Arriving at 11:40, Gate 6. Mom misses you. That morning, a nurse had wheeled me to the transport van, her eyes soft but unsure. I still had stitches beneath my coat, scars too fresh to press against a seatbelt. 14 months and 11 surgeries. I had learned to move again, not to walk. Not anymore, but to balance, to transfer, to exist on wheels. I told her I would be fine from here. I lied. Gate 6 was a blur of greetings, flowers, hugs, squeals, and signs that read, "Welcome home." None of them were for me. I sat there for 47 minutes. I counted. The driver offered to wait, but I waved him off. Pride is a funny thing. It shows up even when your legs don't. The couple across from me argued about whether the flight was early. A teenage girl sobbed into a homemade poster. A toddler ran toward a man in uniform, shouting, "Daddy!" And I swallowed the sound that tried to rise in my throat. My hands shook when I opened my phone again. Still no response. I checked the signal, checked the time, checked the name I sent it to. Everything was right, except the part where anyone cared. I had 2 sons. Philip was the oldest, married to a woman named Diana, a professional talker, too polished, too cold. She had a way of speaking that made you feel stupid if you questioned her. She once told me I should consider letting go of old ways when I said I preferred paper checks to online banking. That woman. Then there was EMTT, quieter, always a step behind his brother. He called on birthdays, texted when reminded. Never disrespected me, but never defended me either. Neither of them came. Not even a message that said sorry. No excuses, just nothing. I could hear the wheels of my chair squeaking as I made my way to the taxi stand. The driver looked at me, surprised. I handed him the address. He nodded and opened the door. I didn't ask for help. We drove in silence. The road out of the airport was lined with summer trees, loud green leaves, and flags at half-mast for someone I didn't know. The world kept moving. My name wasn't carved into anyone's memory anymore. Not in that family. As we got closer to my house, I told him to stop 4 blocks early. He looked confused, but I gave him an extra 20 and said nothing. I needed a moment to see it from afar. The house looked the same. Pale blue paint, white trim, the American flag on the porch slightly faded. 2 cars parked out front. One of them was mine, or at least it used to be. Diana had been staying there while I was gone. She said it made sense, said it was practical, said they would maintain it for me. I believed her at first. I stayed behind a hedge watching. A woman stepped out in my robe. My robe. She carried a glass of wine and laughed into her phone. The porch lights came on automatically. Someone had reset the timer. Someone had claimed my place. Piece by piece. I didn't cry. I wish I could tell you I did, that it made me feel something. But what I felt was cleaner than sadness, sharper than grief. I felt empty in a way that begged to be filled. If you've ever been erased by people you gave everything to, then maybe you understand what came next. I didn't ring the doorbell. I didn't knock. I turned around, rolled away, and opened a different part of myself. The part that had learned how to wait, how to strike, how to take everything back without ever raising my voice. Because sometimes being unwanted is the greatest freedom there is. And I planned to use it. They didn't say it out loud. But everything they did told me the truth. They thought I was never coming back. That night, I stayed at an old motel off Highway 42. No one knew I was in town. I paid in cash. The walls were thin and the mattress sagged, but it gave me time to think. The next morning, I went to the bank, not the local branch where everyone used to know my name. I went downtown. A different clear, a different smile. I asked to review activity on the accounts tied to the house. Mine. She glanced at the screen, then paused. I saw it in her eyes. Something was off. Withdrawals I didn't authorize. Transfers I never approved. A new savings account opened under a trust name that sounded vaguely familiar. They used my power of attorney, the one I signed before surgery. The one Philip said was just in case. There it was. Not fraud, not theft, but betrayal. Neat, clean, documented. They had used my recovery as a window to reposition themselves. Diana moved into the house 2 weeks after my second operation. By the 5th, Philip had re-roofed utilities and changed the title on my second car. I kept my expression neutral, asked for statements to be printed, took them in a manila folder, and walked out like I had nothing but errands to run. From there, I visited the lawyer who handled my late husband's affairs. His name was Merrick. Sharp mind, clean desk. He blinked when he saw me. He said they told him I was in critical condition, said he hadn't expected to see me again. He showed me emails, signed forms, communications from Diana phrased carefully. She had asked for updates, informed him of my declining cognition, requested assistance with succession planning. They were preparing my estate while I was still breathing. Merrick leaned forward, hesitant. He said he hadn't acted on anything yet, said he was waiting for something more official, but they had been circling, waiting for permission, hoping for silence. That silence was over. I left his office and went straight to the storage unit I had rented years ago after EMTT's wedding. Inside were boxes of paperwork, the deed to my grandmother's cottage in Maine, and a locked tin that held copies of every legal document I ever signed. I sat on a folding chair in the dim light and read through each one, page by page, looking for leverage, looking for my name, looking for what was still mine. By the time I left, the sun had dropped behind the hills. I drove back toward the coast and parked 2 blocks from my house. I watched them again through shadows, through windows left open in the evening breeze. They laughed. They poured wine. They lived as though the woman who built that life no longer existed. There were children in the house, my grandchildren. I heard one of them call for Diana, not Mom, but something close enough to twist the knife. The next day, I met with a different lawyer, one I picked myself. Young, fast-talking, efficient. Her name was Clara Ara Scott. She didn't blink when I rolled into her office. She had handled cases like this before. I gave her everything. Power of attorney documents, account statements, the trust forms, the messages. She nodded, flipping through each sheet. Said she would begin with revocation immediate. Said we could freeze assets, trigger reviews, reassert ownership. But the thing that stayed with me most was what she said near the end. She said this wasn't just about property. This was about identity. They had erased me on paper, and now it was time to write myself back in. We filed everything within 48 hours. I stayed quiet. Didn't tell a soul. I let the legal side move first. Quiet, but heavy, like a tide rolling in under the moon. But legal revenge was just the beginning, because it wasn't enough to reclaim what they tried to steal. I wanted them to feel it, to know it, to sit in it the same way I sat alone at Gate 6. They thought I was gone. Now, I would show them what it looked like when a woman they buried too early rose back up, and I wouldn't knock. The legal wheels had been set in motion, slow but steady, but I knew better than to rely solely on paperwork and signatures. Some wars are fought in court, others in silence. Mine would be both. I stayed at the same motel off Highway 42. Every morning I left early and returned late. I kept my presence quiet, invisible. I didn't want anyone in that house to catch wind that I was back. Not yet. I started by mapping their routines. Philip left at 8:15 each morning. navy blazer always pressed, phone glued to his hand. He drove my silver sedan, the one I had bought outright when I turned 65. Diana took her time. Her gym schedule was sacred. She left around 10 in yoga pants and came back 2 hours later, always with smoothies for herself and no one else. Sometimes she wore my old scarf, the one Paul gave me for our 35th anniversary. She didn't wear it like it meant something. She wore it like she owned it. The kids were dropped off by a nanny, not a warm one, the kind who looked bored even while tying a shoe. I doubted Diana knew the name of their homeroom teacher. By the end of that first week, I knew everything. Who came and went, what deliveries were made, which friends stopped by. They had turned my home into a base camp. What they didn't know was that I still had a key. One copy hidden in the back of an old recipe tin in storage. I used it. Late one evening, I waited until the lights were off. I rolled down the side path, careful not to trigger motion sensors. I had installed those sensors. I knew where they ended. The key turned smooth in the lock. They hadn't changed it. Not because they trusted me, but because they had forgotten I existed. I moved through the house like a ghost. My room was unrecognizable. The photos were gone. My books, boxed and replaced with her wellness guides and essential oils. The kitchen smelled like basil and bleach. The china I inherited from my mother was gone. I opened every drawer. Nothing familiar. Then I saw it on the hallway table. A stack of envelopes, one addressed to me. It was from the retirement board, an annual benefits notice, unopened. They had let it sit there for weeks. If I hadn't come, they might have tossed it. I took it quietly. I took more than that. I went through the office drawer and found the living trust paperwork. Not a copy, the original. I replaced it with the decoy. Slightly altered, just enough to cause confusion if they tried to use it again. Then I left just as quietly as I came. The next morning, I made my move. I contacted the community liaison at the local Veteran Support Center, a woman named Nina. She had met me once years ago at a fundraising event. She remembered my name. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was looking to make a donation, not a large one, but targeted a special program, one that provided transitional housing for female veterans recovering from surgery or injury. She said they had been dreaming about such a project. They had a waiting list, a real need. I offered my house, but not all at once. I explained it was in legal limbo, that my family had moved in under false assumptions, that it might take weeks to clear. She listened carefully, then said something that stopped me. She said, "Most people don't give away homes unless they're trying to reclaim themselves." She wasn't wrong. I left that meeting with a date in mind. 2 weeks. That was my timeline. 2 weeks to take back what was mine and turn it into something no one could steal again. In the meantime, I made quiet calls. I had friends, old ones, a retired judge from my neighborhood watch group, a notary who owed me a favor, a former neighbor who now worked in the county records office. I didn't ask for much, just confirmations, quiet checks, updates. Piece by piece, I gathered my ground. I sent a courier to deliver a formal notice to Diana, a gentle reminder that her occupancy was temporary. The name on the deed was under dispute, that she should prepare for transition. I imagined her reading it, glass of wine in one hand, smirk slipping. Philip called me that night, the first contact since I landed. He didn't leave a message. I didn't call back. The next morning, the lawyer filed a motion to freeze the house from any sale or refinance. She also filed a formal revocation of the power of attorney. Legally, they were cornered, but emotionally, I hadn't touched them yet. That would come later. For now, I watched the house from across the street. My house was still standing, but I wasn't in it. Not yet. And when I did walk back in, it wouldn't be through the front door. It would be through fire. I didn't send out the invitations myself. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I had Nana do it through the Veterans C Center's event coordinator under the pretense of a commemorative dinner to honor a small group of long-term donors. That part was true. I had made the donation. What no one knew, certainly not Philip and Diana, was that this dinner was also the final test, a stage. And I wasn't just hosting. I was waiting. It was held at the Woodrow Room in the center of town. Not fancy, but historic. The kind of place that gave dignity to simple things. Stone fireplaces, solid oak chairs, a long walnut table dressed in linen with candles flickering in glass holders. It looked nothing like the house I had built and been erased from. I had asked Nina to invite my family under their own names as +1s to the event. I wanted them to feel casual, even smug. I wanted them off guard. I wore a navy dress, modest but tailored. My hair was tied back. I looked like someone's old librarian or a retired school principal. No one would have guessed that underneath all that calm was a woman who had spent 14 months alone in military rehab, healing from 11 surgeries, learning how to walk again with metal where bone used to be. They arrived late. Diana first, then Philip, who always had to make an entrance. I watched their eyes scan the room for familiar faces, trying to place why they had been invited. They didn't see me at first. I had taken a seat near the middle of the table, quietly speaking with a veteran named Rosalind, a woman who'd lost her husband in a roadside bombing overseas. She knew what this dinner really was. Diana's voice cut through the room like perfume that's too strong. She was laughing too loud at something meaningless. Philip nodded at a few guests as if they were staff. It took him 3 minutes to notice me. He froze mid-step, not dramatic, just a flicker, but I saw it. He wasn't expecting to see my face across that table. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. I just looked. When the host announced that dinner was served, I waited for my moment. It came right after the soup was cleared. The lights dimmed slightly. The event coordinator stood to introduce a speaker, a longtime donor, and decorated military widow who had quietly helped launch a new housing initiative for wounded women veterans. My name was said clearly. I stood, and for the first time in over a year, I saw every head turn toward me with respect. I want to thank this community. I began not for what it gave me, but for what it let me reclaim after being discarded, forgotten, and replaced. I found myself again through service. And tonight I want to return something that was never meant to be hoarded. I paused. I turned slightly toward Philip and Diana. I did not name them. I have spent the last few months establishing a legal foundation that will convert a residential property into transitional housing for disabled female veterans. That home located off Harborview Drive will no longer be occupied by private interests. The eviction notices will be served tomorrow morning. The deed has been reassigned. The locks will be changed. The legal work is complete. A few gasps fluttered around the room, but I kept my voice calm. Some of you may know the house. It has been my home for over 3 decades. It was taken from me under false pretenses while I was undergoing life-threatening procedures with no family beside me. That ends now. I sat back down. No applause, just a silence so sharp you could feel it in your teeth. Philip looked like he'd been hit across the face. Diana's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Rosalind leaned in and whispered, "That was cleaner than a sniper's shot." After dessert was served, they tried to approach me. Philip was the first. "You set us up," he hissed low. "I set the record straight," I said. "Everything else you did to yourselves." Diana stepped forward, voice sharper. "You're ruining everything for no reason." I turned toward her. "You sold my husband's watch online. You wore my scarves. You sat at my table and called it your home." "It's not." They left in a storm of angry silence, coats half-buttoned, pride bleeding through every rushed movement. I didn't follow. Instead, I stood once more, thanked the guests again, and made my way out with Rosalind. In the parking lot, I could see Philip and Diana arguing next to my old car. They didn't realize that the registration had already been revoked. The plates would be pulled by morning. Let them drive one last time. Let them feel the wheels turning under a car that wasn't theirs anymore. Let them hold on to the illusion just a little longer because the next chapter would be worse. I had filed for fraud, perjury, and unauthorized occupancy. The paperwork would hit by Monday. The damage was only beginning. But tonight, I had done what I came to do. I had reclaimed not just a house, but my dignity. And I did it in front of the very people who thought I was too broken to rise again. By the time Monday came, the storm had already begun to move. The eviction notices were served at exactly 7:30 a.m. A uniformed officer handed Philip the envelope while he was standing in the driveway, coffee in hand. I knew because Nana had positioned a volunteer nearby to ensure everything was documented. She texted me 3 words: "It is done." Philip had always taken pride in that house as if it had been built with his bare hands. Truth was, he had never laid a single brick. Every inch of that home came from the salary I earned, the savings I guarded, and the sacrifices I made when his father passed. Diana, of course, had wasted no time redecorating it in the image of a magazine spread, stripping away the photographs, the military plaques, the quiet dignity that once lived there. Now it would belong to women who had earned the right to heal in peace. The legal filings hit them just after lunch: fraud, perjury, and misappropriation of property. They had used my medical absence as a legal window to transfer documents. But the forged signatures, the lack of power of attorney, and the sudden asset movements had created too many red flags. My attorney, a quiet woman named Frances Wilk, had prepared everything like she was writing the final act of a play. By Tuesday, their accounts were frozen pending investigation. Diana called my old neighbor, sobbing about legal harassment. The neighbor called me. I told her gently that there was no harassment, just accountability. I kept to my schedule. I still went to physical therapy. I still volunteered at the community kitchen. But each day, another layer of their scheme peeled away under scrutiny. They had taken loans against the property under my name. They had sold personal items in online auctions. They had tried to transfer the vehicle title while I was unconscious in a recovery unit. What they didn't know was that Nanina had already collected screenshots. My bank had flagged suspicious login from their devices, and every time they used one of my old credit cards, they left a trail. By Thursday, the sheriff's department served them a court summons. The hearing would be held the following month. The charges weren't criminal yet, but the civil penalties would be enough to destroy their savings. They had made one mistake too many. But even then, I wasn't done. Because what I wanted most wasn't revenge. It was reckoning. That Friday, I received a message from my grandson. He was 22, college student, kind boy once. Before Diana began whispering poison into his ears, he sent one sentence. "Grandma, I didn't know. I'm sorry." I read it twice, then I deleted it. Some wounds do not heal with apologies. Some require clean removal of everything that infected them. That evening, I sat at my small rented apartment on Laurel Street. Modest, clean, quiet. The heating worked. The faucet didn't leak. I made tea and watched the sunset paint the window orange. I thought about the old house, about the day I carried my husband across that threshold after his final deployment, about the piano that used to sit by the front window, the one I sold quietly a week after I came back. Because the keys reminded me of laughter I no longer heard. That place wasn't my home anymore, not because they had taken it, but because I had given it up willingly to something bigger than myself, to women like Rosalind who had nowhere to go, to women who had faced bombs and bullets and were now facing custody hearings and eviction notices of their own. Philip and Diana would move eventually. Once the court forced them out, they'd relocate to some rented condo far from Harborview. They'd call it unfair. They'd twist the story. But I no longer lived in the version of the world where their opinions mattered. I had started to sleep with both legs elevated. Doctor's orders. The pain still flared at night, but I could bear it now. Pain was no longer a warning. It was a memory. The next day, Frances told me a reporter had gotten wind of the case. She asked if I wanted to make a public statement. I declined. Let the facts speak. Let the silence be louder than their excuses because I knew something they didn't. The moment the locks changed, their power ended. And when power ends, so does control. They had tried to erase me from my own story, but I had rewritten it in ink they couldn't wash away. And this wasn't the ending. This was only the collapse before the calm, and I would be ready for what came next. It was the last Saturday of the month. Rain had just stopped, but the pavement still glistened like a mirror. I walked slowly up the steps of the old house that no longer belonged to me. Not legally, not emotionally, but I had requested a final meeting through my attorney, and they agreed. Frances insisted she come with me, but I asked her to wait in the car. This was mine to face alone. Diana opened the door. She was thinner than I remembered. Her face was tight, not from aging, but from bitterness. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe like I was a ghost that refused to stay buried. She stepped aside without a word. I walked past her into the living room. The couch had changed, the rug too, but the scratch on the wall from when Philip was 6 and flung a toy truck still hadn't been patched. Some things outlive paint. Philip was already there, sitting with a manila folder in his lap. He looked exhausted, older. His shirt was wrinkled and his shoes untied. The power had started to drain from him the moment the sheriff handed him that first envelope. Now it was almost gone. He stood up and opened his mouth, then closed it again. I sat in the chair across from him. The air between us felt cold despite the heating. "I'm not here to listen," I said, voice steady. "I'm here to speak one time." He nodded barely. "I built this house not with hammers, but with nights I skipped dinner so you could have seconds. With jobs I worked while your father lay dying with memories, and you signed it away while I was under anesthesia." He said nothing. Diana leaned against the wall, arms folded. "I was gone for 14 months, not in Europe, not on a beach, in a military hospital. My lungs collapsed twice, my legs broke again. And not once, not even once did you come." "I sent flowers," he mumbled. "They died in 3 days. I stayed alive." The silence stretched. "Every dollar you moved, every document you forged, every lie you told your children. I have it all. Emails, bank logs, witnesses. I know who coached you. I know when it started. I know everything." His eyes flinched. "You thought I would die. You counted on it. But I came back not just to survive, but to remember and then to reclaim." Diana finally spoke. Her voice was sharp like cold glass. "We did what we had to. You abandoned this family. I served this country. I paid the mortgage from 2 states away. I raised your children while you worked 10-hour shifts and still blamed me for being tired. You never understood," she snapped. "I understood everything," I said calmly. "Especially when I got the text you sent Philip the night you filed the quitclaim deed. I have it. You wrote, 'It's finally all ours. The old bird won't last the winter anyway.'" Philip didn't look up. His hands trembled slightly. "You didn't just betray me. You desecrated what this house stood for. And now everything that came from my hand will be turned away from yours. You already humiliated us," Diana said, voice rising. "Evictions court, the neighbors know." "Good. Let them. Maybe they'll think twice next time before handing over power of attorney to a son who signs behind closed doors." Philip raised his head, eyes wet. "You could have just talked to me." I stared at him. My son. The boy who once cried when he lost his toy truck. The man who now signed away his mother's future for a Lakeview. I talked for years. You just stopped hearing it. A long silence passed. The clock on the wall ticked. The wind outside pushed against the window like a whisper. I stood. "This is my last visit. Not to this house. To you." Philip stood too. "Are you cutting me off entirely?" "I am restoring the order you violated. If that means distance, then yes. Consider this the last chapter you get to write in my book." Diana scoffed. "You think anyone's going to respect what you've done? You're a bitter old woman in a rental." I stepped closer, face level with hers. "No, I'm a woman who gave everything and finally stopped giving to the wrong people." I walked out, closed the door behind me, and didn't look back. Frances sat in the car, engine still running. She didn't ask how it went. She handed me an envelope with the final filing papers inside. Everything was official. As we drove away, I looked up at the house through the rearview mirror. The porch light flickered, the windows were fogged, and for the first time it looked empty in a way that had nothing to do with furniture. That was the day I buried what was left of them and stepped fully into what was left of me. I moved into the small cottage at the edge of Bell Creek 2 weeks after the confrontation. It used to be the guest house of an artist who died with no heirs. Francis had helped me buy it outright with no fanfare, no mortgages, no liens, just a title with my name on it and a brass key that felt heavier than it should. It was modest, but it faced the water. Every morning I could hear the soft lap of waves and birds that had no memory of betrayal. It didn't replace the home I lost, but it didn't carry ghosts either. That was a start. The cottage came with a locked storage shed out back. Inside, Francis and I stored every box of documents we'd collected. Signed transfers, notarized statements, bank logs, attorney memos. The evidence wasn't just for court, it was for the record, for the truth. But that wasn't what today was about. Today, I was going to visit someone I hadn't spoken to in 23 years. Father Lorenzo ran a small community home on the edge of Pinneridge. I had volunteered there briefly before Philip left for college. Then, life took over. The home now served single mothers, aging women without family, and a few veterans with limited mobility. I brought a donation, a modest one, not flashy, just enough to fund the next 3 months of utilities. But it came with a letter, and that letter was the first piece of a shift I had planned in silence. Over the next 10 days, I visited 4 other centers, one for housing assistance, another for adult education, a third for women navigating probate law without support, and the last a farm co-op run entirely by widows who had lost pensions to predatory guardians. To each, I gave a version of the same gift, unrestricted funds, offered quietly with no strings but one requirement: transparency. And to each, I gave a letter. That letter explained what I intended to do with the final portion of my estate. I had spent years preparing, tweaking, and hiding the documents that ensured none of it would fall into the hands of Philip or Diana. What they didn't know was that the properties under dispute weren't the extent of my worth. The brokerage account they thought they'd cleaned out was only one part of what I had tucked away. I had cash reserves held offshore under a trust name Philip never learned, and I had stock options from a government contract years ago that had finally matured. Altogether, it was just under $2.4 million, not a fortune by billionaire standards, but enough to move lines on the map. Frances helped me file the paperwork. We didn't use her firm. That would leave too much of a trail. Instead, she connected me with a woman named Margot, a former compliance officer who now specialized in one thing: legal disentanglements. Margot didn't flinch when I explained what I needed. She drew up the documents with surgical precision. The new trust was named after my mother, Viola Legacy Fund. She had raised me with 2 aprons and no time. She never owned property, but she never bowed her head either. The fund was designed to activate in stages. The first wave of funding would go public in the coming quarter. Press releases were optional, but I knew they'd be noticed. Frances made sure of that. She had friends in the city who still owed her favors. One blog post from a former editor friend would spread. It didn't need to trend, it just needed to reach one inbox: Philip's. By the end of the 3rd week, a soft buzz had already begun in a few nonprofit newsletters. Former military widow launches trust to support vulnerable women. Quiet donor reverses inheritance plan to empower communities. I didn't read them all, just enough to feel the ripple. Then the call came. Frances picked up. She put it on speaker. It was Diana. Her voice was taut, angry, too sharp to be curious. She said she'd seen something online, asked if it was me, asked where the money came from. She made assumptions. Frances didn't answer. She only said that all questions could be directed to legal counsel. 2 days later, Philip called. I didn't pick up. I let him leave a message. He didn't yell. He didn't beg. He just said my name 3 times, each one quieter than the last. They were beginning to understand. This wasn't just about reclaiming a house. This was about rewriting what family meant. Not a hierarchy, not blood, but who shows up. Who answers when you're at Gate 6 at 11:40 after 14 months in a military ward? Who doesn't flinch when your body carries metal where bone used to be? I wrote one more letter that week, a short one. No legal jargon, just a handwritten note to the Board of Trustees overseeing the fund. It said, Make sure no woman has to plead for her worth to be recognized. And if she must fight, make sure she has sharper weapons than silence. By the end of the month, my name was listed as the sole founder. The family line had been cut. The legacy had been redirected. And somewhere in the fog of everything they lost, I hoped Philip would finally see it. This wasn't punishment. It was revelation. Not everything that dies becomes dirt. Some things become seeds. And I had just begun planting. It started with a headline, "Local hero turns tragedy into triumph." Below it was a photo of me standing beside a small wooden sign that read Viola House. I had forgotten the camera crews that came the day we opened the doors. I never expected they would air it during the morning broadcast, but they did. By 10 a.m., my inbox was filled with messages from people I didn't know. Strangers, women, grandmothers, single mothers, veterans, survivors. They thanked me. They asked to volunteer. They offered supplies, donations, stories. I read every single one. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like something inside me had finally returned to life. At 10:37, the phone rang. It was Melanie. I didn't answer. At 10:40, 3 emails came in from Grady's law firm. One was marked urgent, one was labeled retract, and the third was a long-winded, shaky attempt at negotiation. They wanted a statement clarifying that the house and assets used for Viola House were not related to any previous disputes. They called it a misunderstanding. They offered to withdraw all claims and settle things privately. They said we could make it all go away. I read their words like I was skimming an ad for a broken appliance. Unfing, disconnected, uninterested. They knew that was all that mattered. By noon, there were reporters on my street. They weren't aggressive. They didn't even knock. They just filmed the exterior of Viola House and left flowers on the steps. A bouquet of wild violets tied with twine sat by the door. A note said, "For the one who stood back up." That evening, a local news segment aired. They called the project an unprecedented act of private generosity, built from pain but planted in resilience. They didn't name me directly. They didn't need to. My neighbors recognized me. People from church, from the library, from the park. They smiled when we passed. They waved. The next morning, 2 things happened at once. The IRS filed a review request regarding assets transferred by the Nichols Family Trust, and the bank froze the shared business account Melanie had used for her expansion plans, the same account she and Grady had used to siphon rent payments from tenants who thought I was still the owner. Apparently, someone had filed an anonymous complaint. I sat on my porch with my coffee, watching bluebirds flit through the garden. The sunlight hit my hands. They looked older than I remembered, softer somehow, and steadier. Melanie showed up at noon. She didn't knock. She stood at the edge of the walkway, arms folded, jaw locked tight. Her hair wasn't styled. Her blazer looked slept in. She didn't call my name. She didn't even step on the first stone. I waited, sipped, said nothing. She left. By the end of the week, the nonprofit's official website had received over 50,000 visits. Viola House had a waiting list. The local university offered legal support and counseling interns. A local grocerier donated fresh produce every Monday. A retired nurse stopped by with medical supplies. I kept my routine. I cleaned. I took calls. I attended the monthly veteran support group, but I didn't speak about my family. Not in public, not even when they tried to twist the story. Because then came the article. An anonymous source leaked details about the trust transfer and attempted asset manipulation. Grady's name was in bold. Melanie's was in italics. Phrases like breach of fiduciary duty and intent to defraud were tossed around. Lawyers from their end called it character assassination, but it didn't matter. The court ordered an audit. What followed was a slow public unraveling. Melanie stepped down from her board position at the business league. Grady was seen less and less in town. Neighbors stopped calling. Their own son, the one they had paraded at fundraisers, had to withdraw his college application. Financial review pending. I didn't rejoice. I didn't gloat. But I felt a strange, quiet vindication. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be because when I walked down Main Street now, people nodded. They smiled. They didn't look past me. They saw me. And for once, my story wasn't just something whispered behind closed doors. It was written into the town. It was stitched into the lives of women who finally had a safe place to land. It was spoken out loud, on their terms, on mine, and I hadn't said a single word to the ones who tried to silence me. Not yet. The banquet was held in a rented hall on the far end of Cape May, just a short walk from the historic boardwalk. The room shimmered with rented elegance, white linens, pale blue flowers, place cards with embossed lettering spelling out each family name. Grady had sent out the invitations himself, calling it a family celebration and realignment, as if branding the betrayal made it more palatable. I arrived precisely at 6 p.m., walking in alone with a measured gait. I wore the same navy pants suit I had worn the day I first returned from the military hospital. Tailored, sharp, and silent. Heads turned, whispers followed, but no one said a word. At the center of the room was a long table draped in silk, adorned with crystal decanters and place settings arranged with surgical precision. Grady stood at the head, a champagne flute already in hand next to Melanie, who wore an ivory sheath dress that looked too tight for comfort. Their smiles froze the moment they saw me. He raised his voice slightly, trying to keep the energy light. He called it a new beginning for the family, said how sometimes people get caught up in old narratives and lose sight of what matters. Said he was proud of what we had all built together. He gestured toward the future, the legacy, the estate. Then he called my name. I stepped forward slowly. I did not speak into the microphone. I did not raise my voice. I simply placed a cream-colored envelope on the table facing him and said calmly, "This is the irrevocable donation statement transferring all my remaining real estate holdings, including the Cape House, to the Viola Foundation. Effective noon today." There was a pause. Then Melanie made a sound somewhere between a choke and a scoff. Grady leaned forward, brows tight. I kept my eyes on him. It includes the title, deed, and grant certification. The Board of Trustees has already assumed possession. There is no reversal clause. There is no executive challenge. And since the property was solely in my name, there are no other claimants. The room stood still. No one chewed. No one sipped. The illusion of civility hung like a curtain about to fall. I continued. There will be no inheritance battle, no backdoor contest. The vehicles have also been auctioned, the funds reallocated. I paused. The only sound was the quiet hum of the air vents, and then I added, "That leaves nothing." Grady's fingers curled at his sides. Melanie's cheeks burned red. She leaned in to whisper something to him, but I had already turned. I walked to the corner of the room where a small easel held a blown-up check. It displayed the amount $243,000 made payable to the Viola Foundation. Below it, the signature line read, "My full name." I placed a framed photograph beside it, me in uniform. On the first day, I enlisted. Then I faced the room. This is what I leave behind. Not brick, not keys, but conviction. That what is earned with dignity cannot be stolen with deceit, that what is broken can be rebuilt elsewhere. Someone clapped softly, then another. And soon a ripple of reluctant applause rolled through the hall. Not everyone joined, but enough. I did not stay for dessert. As I walked past the entryway, I passed by Grady. He whispered my name. I stopped, but I did not look back. "You made this choice," he said. I replied, "No, you made it when you left me waiting at that airport." Outside, the evening was cool. My driver opened the door. As we pulled away, I saw through the rear view mirror Grady still standing there, motionless. Like a man trying to rewind a tape he could no longer find. The sea roared in the distance, and I let it. It rained the morning after the party. Not the kind of rain that sweeps in with thunder and drama, just a quiet, steady drizzle. Like the sky letting go of what it had been holding too long. I sat at the small table by the kitchen window of my cottage, a mug of tea warming my hands, watching the trees drip slowly. There was no music, no TV humming. Only the sound of water and the quiet crackle of the fireplace behind me. For the first time in a long while, my house felt like mine again. Not a place of strategy or planning, just stillness. I hadn't heard from Grady. Not since that night, and I didn't expect to. Not yet. He wouldn't know what to say. When people lose power, they go silent. That silence is never out of respect. It is confusion, rage, searching for a new weapon. But I had taken the last one from him. I knew that silence well. Years ago, I used to sit beside my husband in the same room and wonder why the quiet felt so sharp. Now I knew it was the sound of people deciding who they would become without you. I wasn't lonely, just clean. In the mail that day was a simple envelope, no return address, no markings. Inside, a single folded sheet of lined notebook paper. The handwriting was uneven, rushed, but I recognized it instantly. Viola. I opened it with care. Her words were few. I saw what you did. It gave me the courage to leave. Thank you. That was all. No apology, no over-explaining, just a declaration of movement. And for the first time, the weight behind my ribs shifted. She left not because I forced her or warned her or pleaded, but because something in her changed, something I couldn't do for her. Only she could do that. I laid the note beside my tea and smiled. Later that afternoon, I returned to the beach house. I hadn't stepped back there since I handed the keys to the foundation director, but I had one more thing to do. The floors were clean. The air smelled of fresh paint and citrus. The light fixtures I had chosen decades ago still hung above the hallway like quiet sentinels. In the living room, beside the empty fireplace, stood a woman, Diana Kane. She was the foundation's new coordinator, mid-40s, sharp but gentle. She had once served in logistics in the Navy. Now she worked to help women with nowhere to go. She didn't greet me with formality or small talk. She said softly, "The first 2 residents moved in this morning. One's from Tampa. The other came straight from discharge." I nodded. The walls are strong and the ocean's good for healing. "So are you," she said, then handed me a small frame. It was a photo, one I didn't recognize. Me in uniform, standing alone in front of a cargo plane, probably in my 30s. My smile was tired but upright. "We found it in the archive. Thought you should see what strength looks like." I took the photo home and placed it beside my father's watch. That night, I slept without waking. For the next few days, there were messages from local veterans, from journalists, from women who said they were afraid to take the first step. I didn't answer most of them. Not yet. I needed the quiet a bit longer. On the 5th day, Melanie called. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. Her voice was brittle. More like herself than she probably realized. "They froze our joint accounts. I can't pay the mortgage. You need to talk to the lawyer. Please." No anger, no entitlement, just desperation. I poured myself another cup of tea. She called again 2 hours later. Then Grady. His message was only 2 words. "You win." But there had never been a game. Only a test of who I would become when the people I loved forgot who I was. I spent the evening writing letters, not to them, to myself. I wrote about the cold hallways of the military hospital, about the nights I stared at the ceiling, counting stitches, about the moment I saw Grady's name on the document, transferring my second car to his name without permission. And then I burned the letters one by one. Ashes curled upward into the fireplace, not a trace of bitterness, just release. At dawn, I walked to the dock behind my cottage. The lake was still. Fog hovered over the water like a curtain. I sat at the edge of the dock, toes barely touching the wood, and let the sun rise without interruption. No one asked me to explain. No one interrupted. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. And when the fog lifted, the horizon looked like possibility. Nothing left to claim, nothing left to lose, only air and peace. By the time the week ended, the headlines had shifted. Grady's name was no longer associated with hopeful legacy or innovation. It was attached to accusations, frozen assets, and bored inquiries. From across the bay, I watched the fall unfold like a storm, unraveling a fortress of glass. He had built his power on my silence. Now, my silence was his undoing. I stayed away from the chaos. I turned down every interview. I declined the councilwoman's invitation to a charity luncheon. I refused the offer from the magazine that wanted to feature me in a spread titled "The Woman Who Outsmarted Her Blood." I wasn't interested in revenge tour fame. I had done what I came to do. Now, I just wanted to live. On Friday afternoon, a small envelope arrived, addressed in a familiar hand. It was the same handwriting from the birthday cards I used to get every year from Rosalie before she stopped writing altogether. Inside a note, a few lines. Quiet, almost afraid. I heard, "I'm sorry. I don't know how to face you." That was all, but it rattled something. It reminded me that not all broken things are to be burned. Some are meant to be mended. The next morning, I sat on my porch with a coffee and a light cardigan wrapped around my shoulders. The air was finally cooling, and the lake looked like it had exhaled after weeks of holding its breath. The breeze was soft. It smelled like leaves and damp earth. I closed my eyes and listened. I thought about the email chain Grady never deleted, about the way Kaylin's voice had risen when she realized the foundation gift was real and irreversible. I thought about the faces in that ballroom, stunned and quiet, and the glint of the plaque being revealed behind the velvet curtain. They had no idea it had already been installed 2 days before. None of it gave me joy. That surprised me. I thought I would feel triumphant, but instead I felt empty, not defeated, just cleared out, like a house finally emptied of tenants who never paid rent. Later that day, I got in my car. Not the new one. The old black sedan with the cracked leather seat and the faint smell of cinnamon gum in the glove box. I drove out past the ridge, then farther, until the city was behind me, and the hills rolled into one another like folds of cloth. I knew where I was going. It took Rosalie 3 full minutes to open the door. Her hair was streaked with silver now. She wore a navy sweater that looked too big for her frame. When she saw me, she froze. I didn't speak. I just looked at her and waited. Finally, she stepped aside. We sat on the porch. She poured tea without asking if I wanted any. It was chamomile. Still hot. Still the way she used to do it, even back when we didn't talk much but sat in silence together while the kids played in the yard. "They told me you wouldn't come," she said finally. I shook my head. That wasn't true. Not then and not now. I didn't agree with them, she added quietly. Not with what Grady did. I stayed out. I thought it wasn't my place. "You had a place," I said. "You left it empty." She nodded. A tear slipped out of one eye and she let it fall. It wasn't about punishing her. I hadn't come for that, but she needed to hear it, and I needed to say it. We talked eventually about the early years, about the Sunday mornings and burnt pancakes, about the garage door that jammed every winter. She showed me a photo of her daughter, my granddaughter. I had only seen her once at a crowded 4th of July cookout years ago. She looked like Grady, but her smile was softer. Maybe she took that from her mother. When I left, Rosalie hugged me tight. Not out of guilt, but out of grief. We had both lost years. That kind of loss lingers. On the drive back, I let the windows down. The air was brisk. It pulled my hair loose and made my eyes water. But I liked it. It reminded me I was still here, still moving. That night, I slept well. For the first time in months, there were no dreams of hospital corridors or echoing footsteps in empty airport terminals. Just the sound of water brushing the shore. Just the weight of blankets and peace. I didn't expect anything more. Not forgiveness, not redemption, just this, the quiet after the storm. And that was enough. The wind rolled off the ocean that morning, salty and soft, brushing over my skin as I stepped barefoot onto the back deck. The house was quiet, still filled with the silence of a place that had finally exhaled. For the first time in what felt like years, there was no tension hovering above the floorboards, no fear tucked into the corners of the walls. I moved slowly, careful with my steps, but not because of pain. That had long been a companion, one I had made peace with. No, I moved slowly because I wanted to take it in. The light, the stillness, the peace I had bought back with the price of my own clarity. The documents had been filed and notarized the day before. The trust for the Women of Valor Initiative was now public record. My name, not theirs, would be attached to every scholarship, every training program, every shelter that fund created. The beach house would soon host retreats and seminars for women who had survived abandonment or betrayal. That was the life it would hold now, not the lies they tried to nest here, not their greed. I poured myself a cup of tea, the same chamomile blend Rosalie once brought me years ago. She had come by earlier with warm cornbread and quiet eyes, the kind that saw through you without judgment. We didn't speak much, just sat. I think that was what I needed most. To sit in silence with someone who had nothing to take from me. Grady had left town, or so I'd heard. Some said he was staying with friends out in Raleigh. Others said he'd checked himself into a clinic. I didn't ask. I didn't follow. Let the town gossip carry that weight. Let the people who once nodded politely and whispered behind my back be the ones to debate his fall. I had walked away from that, from him, from all of it. Not because I was better, but because I was finally done. A stack of letters sat on the corner of the table from women I had never met, some young, some as old as me. Each of them had seen the press release or heard from a friend of a friend about the woman who had reclaimed her life after being left at the airport, after being ignored, silenced, used. Each of them saw a piece of themselves in my story, and somehow in their words I saw a mirror of my own courage reflected back. I hadn't planned for this. I hadn't expected to become anything more than a grandmother with a bruised heart and a stubborn will. But the thing about walking through fire is sometimes other women gather near the light, and then they begin to walk too. The sun shifted higher, painting a warm trail across the wooden slats of the deck. I sat back in the chair, the same one Grady once mocked me for keeping, said it was too old, too wobbly, not worth the space. I smiled. It still held me, solid, unbothered. Somewhere in the distance, kids were playing. I heard the faint splash of water, a dog barking, the echoes of a life moving forward. Not mine to chase, just mine to witness. I thought of Lillian, my daughter-in-law. I wondered if she'd ever sit with the silence long enough to hear her own heart beat past the noise. I no longer hated her. There was too much distance now, too much air between us. But I wouldn't forget, and I wouldn't open the door again. Forgiveness wasn't always about re-entry. It was about release. I finished my tea, picked up a pen, and wrote a single sentence in my journal. I am home. Then I closed the book and let the day begin. If this story touched something in you, you're not alone. So many of us have faced silence where we expected love, betrayal where we offered trust. But healing doesn't always come from others. Sometimes it begins the moment we stop waiting for them. Tell me in your own quiet way, when did your healing,